Hello everyone, DM Gashbad here, and we are back with a Warhammer Fantasy 8th Edition Battle Report. I didn't expect to have one of these. I was supposed to play Dungeons & Dragons last Sunday, but the game got cancelled at the last minute, so I quickly went around and tried to find out if anyone would be interested in some miniature wargaming instead, and I was able to find someone to play a Warhammer game. So this is just going to be a quick 750 point pitched battle. This is the army that I brought. I decided I wanted to go back to my old Orcs and Goblins. Specifically, I wanted to try an all-Orc army, which I haven't done in a long time. And there's a reason for this. I have to admit that if I saw this army lined up against me, I would assume the person that I was about to play was either new or didn't know what they were doing. I would assume they brought a bunch of Orcs because they didn't have any other models. Orcs are pretty direct. They don't really have a whole lot of tricks to them. They're not particularly good either on defense or offense. They're really middle of the road. Add to that a pretty blah leadership and animosity makes for a pretty unreliable army. And yet their points values are not particularly low. So it's very common to see Orc and Goblin armies that are themed around goblins, night goblins, savage orcs. You very rarely see an all-Orc and Goblin army. But I wanted to do it. I haven't used these models in a long time, and I just have a soft spot for the Orcs. And at 750 points, it's not as big of a handicap as in larger battles. Your opponent's army is not going to necessarily have the tools to really take advantage of a straightforward, middle-of-the-road army like this. Plus, I wanted to try some things. Namely, I always thought that Orc big bosses were fairly well costed. They're only 55 points each and not bad. Toughness 5, 2 wounds, weapon skill 5, 3 attacks, strength 4 plus 1 strength on the first round of combat. They're almost always overshadowed by the much cheaper Goblin big bosses, but I think there might be some value in those guys, so I'm going to bring 2 of them. One is going to be my general. He's going to be equipped with great weapon and just light armor, and he's also going to take the Ruby Ring of Ruin. The idea is I'm going to put him in a block of big gun spears. My thinking is that if I'm forced to sit across from my opponent, if they're not charging me and I can't get to them, I at least have something to try and blast them with in the magic phase without spending all the points on a shaman. And Orc shamans are not great. And it gives me something to do with all the power dice that I will be accumulating. The Ruby Ring of Ruin is just a really effective magic item at low points games. The second big boss I'm going to bring is going to be mounted on a boar. I'm going to give him an enchanted shield and a sword of might. So that's going to bring his armor save up to 2+ and his strength up to 5, 6 on the first round of combat. He does only have 3 attacks, but he does have a boar, which is going to be strength 5 on the first round of combat if he charges as well. More importantly, I'm going to put him in with a unit of Orc Boar Boys, and this is a risk. Boy, you almost never see Orc Boar Boys on the field, but I want him to go in there to add a little extra combat power because I'm not sure what they can accomplish on their own, and also give them that leadership 8. Speaking of the Orc Boar Boys, there they are on the right, my Skullpire Boys. I was able to afford 7 of them. They are 20 points a pop, which isn't a great value. They only have an armor save of 3+. Their movement is only 7. At leadership 7 and initiative 2, weapon skill 3, I can see why I haven't been taking these guys. Still, on the charge, they're strength 5, including the mounts, and on the first round of combat, if they get charged, they're still strength 4. And at toughness 4, they might be able to survive a fair amount of stuff that you'll see at a small point value game. The rest of my army is made up of a unit of regular Orc Boys, 22 of them with full command and shields, and a unit of 19 Orc Big Guns with spears, shields, standard, and musician. There's no reason to give a boss to Orc Big Guns. You're paying 15 points, and the only difference between him and a regular guy is an extra attack and the ability to declare and accept challenges, so it's not really worth 15 points. For Boar Boys and regular Orc Boys, it's a great value. You get an extra point of strength, an extra point of weapon skill, the challenges, and the extra attack. So the thinking here is that in a lot of games, I find that people try to avoid big blocks of troops. And so this army is made of nothing but big blocks of troops. So if my opponent wants to go and get some points, they're going to have to get into a reasonable fight. That said, I think they can be outfought by a really fighty army, they can be outshot by a really shooty army, they can be outmaneuvered by a really fast army, and just the animosity and leadership makes it so that if my dice go bad, then things can go bad really, really quickly. But enough of that, let's see what my opponent has brought. I am going to be facing off against a High Elf army, which is interesting. I don't think this is a terrible matchup for me. The toughness 4 might do fairly well against the pretty moderate strength of most high elf attacks, and their general squishiness with toughness 3 and low armor saves means that I could actually do some damage in return. This particular army also doesn't have a bunch of flyers or cavalry or chaff units to throw in my way, so I might be okay on the maneuverability front. I was worried about a really heavy shooting army like dwarfs or a really fighty army like chaos. This I might be able to handle. Part of the bad news is that there is a fair amount of shooting which my guys are fairly vulnerable to. It is led by a level 2 mage, but it's on Heaven's Magic, which could be worse. The spells that the mage rolled up are Harmonic Convergence and Curse of the Midnight Wind. One is an augment, reroll ones for to hit, to wound, and armor saves for one of your units. The other is a hex. The target unit has to reroll 6s onto hit, to wound, and armor saves. So very similar spells, just one's a augment and one's a hex. I think I would have been much more concerned if the mage had rolled up a bunch of really blasty spells, so I think I'm alright with this. She does have the Ring of Fury, which has that Soul Quench High Elf spell, which causes 2d6 Strength 4 magic missile hits, and that's a little worrisome, but at least that's a bound item and it's easier to dispel. The more problematic ranged attack is going to come from the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower. In addition, there are also 14 Sea Guard with a banner and musician, and the combat portion of the list consists of a unit of 10 Swordmasters with full command and 10 Phoenix Guard with full command and the Gleaming Pendant, so it gets to re-roll its first failed leadership test. There's no question that either of these two units can outfight my guys, but at such low numbers, I'm not sure they can win the battle of attrition. With all that sorted out, here is the table all set up and ready to go. We are actually playing at Great Escape Games in Rocklin. It's kind of a gaming store halfway between our two houses, and was just convenient for us to meet at in this particular case. We're using their battle mat, which seems to be kind of a jungle sci-fi thing, but I think it looks good enough, so we just left it on there. Plus, I don't have to measure out 4 feet on my regular cloth. We're only using a 4 foot by 4 foot play area, so the last 12 inches on either side we're not going to use. We went with D3 plus 2 pieces of terrain. We ended up with 4 of them. We got a building, a forest, and 2 sets of walls. The high elf player put the forest in a deployment zone, hoping to camp out there and force my guys to go into it. I put the building in the middle because I didn't want that in a deployment zone. Most of the walls are set up behind the building, kind of a little garden area out there, and then you see the others over on the right. I won the roll to choose table edge, and so I chose the one with the forest in it to deny my opponent that piece of terrain. And I set up, as you see there, I put the boar boys all the way on the left so I can go on a flanking maneuver around that building, and I put my 2 orc units on either side of the forest. I'm going to put those guys together and just march straight up the middle. Against a bunch of shooters and only being movement 4, I don't feel like I can waste a whole lot of time, so I think this is going to be a quick game one way or the other because I plan on going at the High Elf lines at full speed. We'll see what happens. The High Elves have the Sea Guard positioned behind the house pointing at my flank. They, of course, got the choice to react to my deployment since I had to set up a unit first, and they outnumber my deployments as well. The mage is in with the Phoenix Guard in the center of the table. The Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower is behind a wall behind them. And there we have the Swordmasters holding down the right. As you might expect, my big boss on the boar is in with the boar boys, and my big boss on foot is in with the big guns. Since I had finished deploying first, since I only had 4 drops total, I got a +1 to the die roll to see who goes first, and I won that, so no point in being subtle. I moved all my guys as far forward as I could, which was helped out by the fact that none of them fell victim to animosity this round. Technically, the boar boys could have actually gone a little bit further, but I kept them just out of 12 inches of the Sea Guard so that they weren't in short range when they shot their bows. In the magic phase, I got something like 9 dice, so just went ahead and threw all 6 dice into the ruby ring, targeting the Swordmasters. I got double 6s, irresistible force, so I managed to punch that one through. I only rolled 2 hits on the Swordmasters though, and I rolled a 1 to wound on one of the dice, so I ended up killing one of those guys, and there goes the ruby ring, burnt out and useless for the rest of the game. So at least there's one phase of the game I don't have to worry too much about. Over to High Elf turn 1, and as you might imagine, a unit of 8 boar boys rolling down your right-hand flank will attract a lot of attention. So, first off, the mage bails out of the Phoenix Guard unit and ends up in the center of the High Elf lines, no longer threatened by any magic or shooting. The Phoenix Guard wheel out behind the building, going through all those barriers, trying to block the boar boys from completing a charge against the Sea Guard. On the one hand, I think he's right. I think I would much rather send the boar boys into the Sea Guard than the Phoenix Guard. On the other hand, I'm a little surprised he's giving me such an easy charge right away. He could have backed off, hunkered behind the obstacles, used a little bit of time to use magic and shooting to whittle down the boar boys. The Phoenix Guard are good, but it's a little dicey taking that charge. The Sea Guard actually end up moving up a little bit to get a better shot or to help out the positioning or something. We go on to the magic phase, and I was able to prevent most of the spells from happening. Most importantly, I was able to dispel the Ring of Fury. He was able to get Harmonic Convergence off on the Sea Guard, which I'm not too worried about. In the shooting phase, he starts off with the Bolt Thrower as you would expect, and he's going into the Boar Boys, which is a very difficult shot. He gets 6 shots, but even though it's at short range, it is -2 because he's shooting through just a bunch of hard cover and his own troops. So he needs 5s to hit, 4s to wound, and then I'm going to get a 5-up armor save. He manages to roll a pile of hits and then punch through a bunch of wounds on top of that, and I fail all my armor saves, so I end up losing 3 Boar Boys from that salvo. I do end up passing my panic test, but it's not a great start. Thankfully, the next shooting unit will be the Sea Guard. They will get 3 hits and wounds through, however I will pass all my armor saves, and so I don't take any further damage. All in all, it hurt, but it could have been a lot worse. My turn again, and everybody passes their animosity test. I see no reason not to take this charge. So in the Boar Boys with their big boss go against the Phoenix Guard, we'll see how it works out. The thing is, if I had taken one more casualty, I probably would have been able to skip past them and get into the Sea Guard, and I'm not sure how that would have worked out, but this is how it had to be in the meantime. The Orc Infantry's got nothing better to do than to stomp forward towards the rest of the High Elves. There's no magic or shooting phase, so we go straight on to hand-to-hand combat. And both of us roll like hot garbage. Both the Phoenix Guard and the Boar Boys only managed to inflict a single wound on each other, which is just kind of pathetic. I did the averages afterwards, and I think both of us averaged, almost 3 wounds each. So with these small games, you're dealing with small margins like this, but both of us really underperformed. I do end up winning the combat. The Phoenix Guard do manage to pass their break test without using their Gleaming Pendant. Again, it's one of those things where it could have gone worse, but I think having the bad dice rolls in this first round favors the Phoenix Guard because now my orcs don't get that charge and choppa bonus to their strength for the coming rounds. I'm going to have to really lean on my big boss to do a lot of damage from now on. So it's the High Elf turn, and the High Elf player can't resist. He's going to send the Sea Guard into the flank of the Boar Boys. In remaining moves, the mage shuffles to the left away from the advancing orcs, and the swordmasters just creep backwards. The magic phase doesn't go too badly for me. The only spell that the High Elf player is able to cast is Curse of the Midnight Wind, which he puts on the orc biguns. In the shooting phase, the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower opens up against the biguns, but it rolls pretty poorly and only ends up killing one of those orcs. It's time for hand-to-hand combat, and again, the dice rolls are very poor. The Phoenix Guard start off and are only able to kill off 1 Boar Boy and the Boar Boy boss. Unfortunately, the only model in contact with the Sea Guard is the Boar Boy boss, and so they actually don't really get to attack anything. They just make sure that that guy is super dead. For my part, with my big boss and remaining Boar Boy, I do no damage whatsoever. Now, part of that is because I failed my fear test. Phoenix Guard caused fear. On the first round, I passed it. On the second round, I failed the 8 or less, and so I needed 5s to hit, and so that didn't work out. I'm looking at a 3 or less break test, which I fail. The Phoenix Guard attempt to restrain pursuit and manage to make their leadership test. The Sea Guard try and chase after me. I roll a double 6s. Well, with cavalry, roll 3 dice, throw it the lowest. I ended up with 2 6s, so I go the maximum 12. I'm going to flee away from the largest unit, which is the Sea Guard, so I'm going to run straight to that building. There are going to be some really surprised farmers in there as I crash through the back door and out through the front. Unsurprisingly, the Sea Guard do not catch me and the Phoenix Guard just turn around. Now, I make a mistake here. I'm sorry, I haven't played in a while, but when we broke from combat, the Boar Boy Standard Bearer should have died, should have immediately exploded, and it would be just the big boss who took off. At the time, I thought this was really inconvenient because I thought the presence of one model in that original unit would have meant that instead of rallying on my big boss's leadership of 8 or less, he would have rallied on a double 1. This is also incorrect. The character being in there adds to the number of the unit. So the initial number was 7. I still have 2 models in there because I do count the character. 2 is over 25%. So I would have rallied on my normal leadership value at that number if for some reason the standard was still there, which of course he shouldn't have been. Everybody good with that? Great. Okay, so the point is when I ran through the building, I was actually hoping this one Boar Boy standard would fail his dangerous terrain test and die so that my big boss would rally at a normal number. Anyway, none of that stuff should have actually taken place. And in the event, I passed both my dangerous terrain tests, so the farmers don't manage to stab me with kitchen knives as I barrel through. And I end up on the other side of the house where you see there. The Sea Guard can't actually go anywhere because the Phoenix Guard are in their way, and it just kind of ends up in that jumble off to the left. So back to my turn, and the Orc boys on the right fail animosity, but that's okay. They get a 2 to 5 result, which is a squabble, which means they have to declare a charge on the closest unit, which are the Swordmasters, which I was going to do anyway. The bad news is they're still kind of far away, and I need an 8 or more, and I don't get it, and so the boys only stumble forward 4 inches. The good news is that even though I thought I only rallied on a double 1, guess what the Boar Boys and the Boar Boys Big Boss did? They rolled a double 1 for their leadership check. It's a little disappointing for me to realize at this point that they actually didn't need that, but I was thrilled at the time. So they turn around like that, and the big guns creep forward. The issue that I have is that I don't want the Phoenix Guard and the Swordmasters both to charge my big guns. I don't think they'll hold that charge. I'm okay with one of them charging, but I don't want them both to charge. So I end up a little back from where the Orc boys end up. I didn't see any reason to charge with the big guns. They were significantly further away from the Swordmasters, so it would have been a very difficult charge. And plus they still have that Curse of the Midnight Wind. No shooting or magic from me, so we're back to the High Elf turn, and he decides he's going to go for it. Rather than let me dictate the course of the battle, he is going to take this very tempting charge from both his Swordmasters and his Phoenix Guard into the regular Orc boys. Swordmasters to the front, Phoenix Guard to the flank. Both of his units make it, which would be the first problem. If only one unit came in, then he might be in a little bit of trouble. But even so, it's a risky move. Those elves need to kill enough orcs to break their steadfast, chase them off so that they aren't sitting right in front of those big guns. In remaining moves, the Sea Guard turn around to face the big guns. The mage shuffles around a little bit. The magic phase is a complete bust. I believe he throws most of his dice into Curse of the Midnight Wind, which I luckily managed to dispel with my natural dice. I think that leaves him just 1 die to try and cast Harmonic Convergence, which he fails. In the shooting phase, the only casualty caused is a single Orc big gun from the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower, so not amazing. In the hand-to-hand combat phase, the Orcs do manage to pass their fear test, and they lose 7 of their number from the combined attacks of the Phoenix Guard and the Swordmasters. In return, they only kill off 2 Swordmasters, which is a little disappointing. That first round of combat, they've all got +1 strength, so the boss is at strength 5, the regular guys is strength 4. Still, crucially, they still have their ranks, and they are steadfast, so they pass that leadership 8 or less to stay, and we go on to the next turn. Orc big guns pass their animosity check and go barreling into the rear of the Phoenix Guard. The Boar Boys are still right there. They can see, and there's no reason for them not to charge in as well, so they clip the corner as you see there. Moving on to the hand-to-hand combat phase, and disaster strikes for the Orcs. We fail the fear test of the Boar Boys and the Orc Boys, so they all go down to weapon skill 1. This is a crucial round of combat and is absolutely not what I needed. The High Elves kill off 2 big guns and 4 normal orcs, but in return I kill no Swordmasters and only 3 Phoenix Guard. A very disappointing result considering that those big guns are at strength 5 on that charge, and I have 2 big bosses in that combat, each with 3 attacks and striking at least strength 6. The good news as such is that I do end up winning the combat by 1. So the Swordmasters have a 7 or less break test to make, and the Phoenix Guard have an 8 or less re-rollable. They manage to succeed in all the break tests, so we're all still standing there ready to go on to the next round. And in the High Elf turn, this big mess of a combat gets even messier as the Sea Guard now countercharge the rear of my big guns. In the magic phase, my opponent gets 6 dice to my 5 and spends 2 of those dice to cast Harmonic Convergence on the Swordmasters. I suspected that the next spell was going to be Curse of the Midnight Wind on the big guns, since he can't use the Ring of Fury on anyone since we're all locked in combat. I would much rather have dispelled Curse of the Midnight Wind, but I just had a sense that I'd better go for the easier spell to dispel. I kind of thought an Irresistible Force was coming. And of course, if that happened, then all my dispel dice would be wasted. So I went and dispelled Harmonic Convergence. He went and cast Curse of the Midnight Wind on the big guns, got the spell, didn't actually end up with the Irresistible Force, but he rolled a very high number, so I think I'm okay with my decision. With no targets to shoot, we go ahead and go on to hand-to-hand combat. The Orc boys again go and fail their fear test, so they're down to weapon skill 1 again. The combined attacks of the High Elves kill off 4 big guns and 3 orcs. In return, even though I am now facing a much weaker opponent in the Sea Guard, I only kill off 1 Phoenix Guard. And I believe that casualty was caused by the boar ridden by my big boss. So again, all my orcs, my 2 big bosses, all those strength 4 big guns, no casualties caused. And it wasn't even because of that spell, because I went and tracked all the things that made a difference for that spell, and it actually didn't make a difference. It was just very, very poor rolling. Okay, so all of my units are on double 1s to stay, and they all fail, and with that, the game is called. My guys lost, we head off to the hills, and the High Elves are victorious. So on the face of it, it was a complete rout for the Orcs. We didn't get a single victory point from the High Elves, and all our guys ran away. But here's the thing. First off, really fun game, really aggressive. I did enjoy playing the Orcs that way. Normally, I'm much more cagey and careful, but just sending a bunch of guys screaming at the opponent is actually kind of fun every once in a while. Also, I'm glad that that boar boy that lived that shouldn't have played absolutely no part in the remainder of the game, so the rules mistake that we made didn't actually matter. Also, despite the lopsided victory point totals, this game was actually fairly close. There were a couple of really dicey combats for the High Elves that could have gone the other way. That first boar boy charge against the Phoenix Guard, as soon as he bombed his first set of rolls, there was a big opportunity for me to run those guys down, which would have changed the whole nature of the game. Also, that round where I charged in with the big guns into the rear of the Phoenix Guard, my opponent was very lucky to come off with as few casualties as he did. I think he rolled fairly poorly himself, but if he had lost 1 or 2 more casualties, those break tests would have been much more difficult. And as it was, if one of those guys had run away, especially those Swordmasters who were only on a 7 or less, suddenly the Orcs are looking in a much better spot. So it didn't work out, but as proof of concept, I'm not convinced that a small point value all-Orc army is unfeasible. It's possible that if I change some of those equipment loadouts to double choppas instead of spears or shields, or if I had found the points to maybe drop the Ruby Ring of Ruin and get in a battle standard, all of a sudden the army might be okay. But maybe I'm crazy. I want to thank my opponent. He played a very good game, had a very reasonable army, played it really aggressively in spots which made for a fun encounter. Leave a comment below if you have any questions, observations, concerns, that kind of thing, and I will see you on the next one.